You're listening to The Dating Den with dating and relationship badass and best-selling author Marni Batista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important dating, sex, and relationship issues you want to know about. So if you're ready for true talk that's authentic and unfiltered, and you're not afraid to be called out on your stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
The Dating Den, episode 26 with Dr. Sheldon Kardener. Why your adult brain acts like a 6-year-old and how it's sabotaging your relationships. Welcome, ladies. Welcome back to the Dating Den. Oh my gosh. I have a celebrity crush on our next guest. You are going to love hearing from really a brilliant man. I read his book and it changed my life, and I shared it with a lot of my clients in Dating with Dignity, and it's mind-blowing. So you are in the right spot and you are going to love it. So before I do the big bio, I just want to welcome Dr. Sheldon Kardener to the Dating Den. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you.
I'm so happy you're here. So I used to do, I still do it a little bit, but I had this video on YouTube, a show called The Dating Den, and I shot it in my dating den, my den in my house. So we decided to make it, a podcast. So, if you feel more comfortable, imagine we're sitting in my living room in the Dating Den.
Okay.
Rather than just we're having our virtual conversation. I'm so happy that you're here. So for those of you who have not heard of Dr. Kardener, he is the creator of focused dynamic therapy, which is really interesting. And really, the essence of focused dynamic therapy is to identify the earlier threads that have become woven into the fabric of our present lives, which allows a therapist and the patient to express in ordinary language an understanding of the patient's problem, which I think is brilliant. And that ultimately contributes to creating this working alliance toward resolution of a lot of stuff from your past that up until the point of really engaging in this process has been really hard to handle. And so Dr. Kardener is a therapist, and he graduated with a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering, which I think is fascinating, and then a doctorate from the School of Medicine with honors from Wayne State University. And he then completed a psychiatric residency at the University of California, LA, UCLA, and joined the faculty where he's now a clinical professor of psychiatry, which is really cool. And he has written extensively. He's practiced psychodynamic psychotherapy with a special interest in couples therapy. And he's taught a lot of mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses, marriage and family therapists, as well as just general groups all over the United States and Europe. And in his book called Breaking Free, which is the book that turned me on to this whole body of work, he takes all of these experiences and illuminates really this unique approach that he has to understanding how our emotional conflicts develop and can be treated in psychotherapy. So let me just ask you like a basic question. What was really the root of you wanting to write this book and distill all this information? What was going on? Was it going on in your practice? Was there something that really made you start to think about this?
Well, it's something that's been informing my lectures to mental health professionals for a very long time. And I decided that while I'm lecturing it to a group of people and sharing the thoughts, it's a relatively smaller group of individuals, and decided, well, let's try translate it into a book and see how it flies. And that's what got it going. So it's actually been evolving over my entire professional career, and sort of is a summation, as it were, up to this point of my experiences and thoughts and feelings, orientation toward psychotherapy and what makes people tick.
So I went to therapy for, freaking probably 15 years. I had a great therapist, but I feel like what you're doing is really different. So how is this process of what you call breaking the chains different from other approaches, and why does it really work?
Well, I think that in fairness, to step back and look at, I think the brand names. There are some 430 different type of brand names of therapies. So they all have in common the relationship or the connection, the chemistry, if you will, between the therapist and the patient or client for psychologists and social work, etc. So I think the issue is that there's something in the human interaction that is first and foremost the bottom line. What I try to do in the approach is to make accessible that relationship to the patient so that we're both on the same page in terms of what it is that I perceive going on in the individual that may be causing them to get in their own way, and share that with them, and often warn people that, look, I am speculating, not pontificating. I'm perfectly willing to be entirely wrong, but from what I hear you describe, from what the experiences are, from what I glean from what you've presented, this seems to be what's going on. And it's an attempt to foster the therapeutic alliance between the patient and the doctor in a way that the patient really is the co-therapist with the therapist. And I think that's vital for successful therapy. So to the extent that we are trying to bring in to play not only the emotional realm, which certainly is vital, but also give it an opportunity to put words to the music and to be able to understand better, that isn't necessarily curative, but it facilitates the relationship that can then help toward the curative process.
Well, that's what I really loved about your book, was that you took these concepts about why we are stuck and made it very simple to understand. So as it sort of pertains to the ladies that are listening to this podcast, you know, a lot of the women that are listening are really smart, really successful, very high achieving women, and they usually accomplish anything they sort of set their mind to. But when it comes to relationship, there's like this big disconnect. It's like the one thing, you know, they're not able to really achieve, to create. And what is really at the cause of a lot of that, from my experience and reading your book, is that they are trying to get these unresolved childhood needs met as adults. And it seems to be, I think you call it a mission impossible. So can you address that? Why, like, high achieving people, you know, not able to really connect the dots and make a breakthrough?
Remember that we are in different settings, different people, and what I like to, and I'm indebted to Eric Berne in his, and the guy who wrote Games People Play. Some are familiar with him from that standpoint, but the notion of transactional analysis, and I reduce that to two states of mind. One having to do with the past, that's what I've called needs, that the child part of us clings to because it was invested with survival. And without having whatever it was that constituted our earliest connections with caretakers, if we didn't have that, we ended up in the trash bin. Literally, in some situations, not as frequent now that California allows a newborn to be turned in to almost anyone, but usually it's police, fire, church, but almost anybody, within 72 hours and walk away. But it emphasizes the idea, even with that enlightened law, that we still, about every 12 months or so, read about an infant who's been abandoned in a trash bin or side. So it emphasizes the vital nature of having to make a connection. And that is imbued with survival, and that's what I call the need. Now, if what was not entirely gratifying about the need, it may be in total contrast to what I refer to as what we want as adults. For those of us whose needs run exactly the same direction as what we want, and pretty much go through life on autopilot, and very successfully. I've known very few. I can only think of one couple, actually, where that was the case. But going back to your question about the successful people, are very able to function because they're free of the pull of those early needs in their professional lives, in their role as man or woman in the world. They may be contaminated in terms of conflicts at the husband-wife level, so that upon marriage, all of the old unresolved stuff comes roaring back. Or they may be quite successful as a husband-wife, but when the first child comes along, then the script about parent comes into play, and unresolved issues from the past get precipitated by the birth of the child. It's an interesting aside that a firstborn child does something no other children can do, and that is the firstborn gives birth to the parents. There are no parents until the firstborn. And once the firstborn occurs, then, my God, I'm a mommy, I'm a daddy. And if that's the level at which conflict has been simmering, it's going to come roaring forth. So a person may be very successful in their man-woman role in the world, or in their husband-wife role even, but then it falls flat in terms of the conflict interfering in the mother-father role. So it depends on, it could be contaminated at all three levels. But when you talk about successful people, generally are able to function in the world because they're free of conflict going back to the past. And that conflict is that part of ourselves that holds on to what we had to. It was real. We had to have happen in our childhood in order to survive. So it's very much, to use a very simplistic example, the abused girl who cannot wait until she's old enough to get out of the house. And what does she do? Marry an abusive guy. Why? Does she want abuse? Of course not. No one ever wants illness. They want health. But the pull is back to the familiar. My home is a place that I hate, but it's where I get hit or called names or too often sexual abuse. And that's not desired. It's not wanted, but it's needed, because without it, I don't have a home. So there's a tremendously powerful emotion in maintaining what we don't want. And it competes with what we do want. And that's where the tug occurs between the child state and the adult. And the child has got the thumb on the scale, so to speak, because survival was once realistically associated with what was perceived to have in order to know you were safe and at home, even if it meant brutality or pain, distress. It was always better than the dumpster. So when you talk about, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so when you look at, and I know that you work with a lot of couples, so when you are, sitting across the room, sort of from men and women that are going through this, what are some of the patterns or behaviors or beliefs that seem to get them stuck, that manifest in adulthood, that are coming from those unmet needs in childhood?
I mean, Leo, an interesting concept on you in this regard, that we always marry our emotional twin. And the reason that we're drawn to people, we can list. I mean, I certainly have had couples where the man or the woman, or it could be a gay couple, it doesn't matter, or a lesbian couple. I mean, the dynamic is the same idea of being drawn to a person who, at some level, it's unconscious in us, but who would understand what it was like to come from the home that we came from. And so we find ourselves powerfully drawn to that person. We can list, and they're real, they're intelligent, they're attractive, they're all of these, they like baseball, whatever it might be, that we're consciously aware of, but we are not aware that we've been drawn to them in order to find a way of fighting an old battle on a new battlefield, hoping this time we'll win. And that's why I say it's a mission impossible, because what we do is spend our present time trying to change the past. Can't do it. And that's where people get hung up, is in spending their time, energy, and effort in the present, trying desperately to say, no, don't tell me I really lost. Let me change the past so I come out a winner.
Wow, that's so profound. Because like you said, I mean, you can't go back in time and get those childhood needs met, whether it's something as dramatic and tragic as, being left or abuse. Or I know in my situation, I had a dad who was a workaholic, right? So he was, he worked every week and he came home for like 36 hours or 24 hours on the weekends. And so I sort of always had this accepting a little bit of attention and wanting more, right? You could just see the pattern,
sure.
Right? But I think what's really interesting is, and I would hope people can underline and underscore this, is that if you are constantly trying to get that need met for the past in the present, you're never you can't heal that, resolve that. So the question is then, what do you do? How do you help your patients really disconnect from that and really start behaving as sort of like the emotional adult or their adult self? So that really sort of begs the question then, what is the process? What can you do with a patient to help them really disconnect from trying to get those needs met in the past, in the present, and start to really be in relationship as that emotional adult?
Yeah, I think the most succinct way, and it gives me an opportunity to credit one of the most charismatic women I've ever met, Naomi Rachel Raymond, and she has a series of very interesting late-oriented books of good common sense, etc. But I assume she's still living, a remarkable person. But the point of introducing that was to give her credit for the comment that is key. There ain't no healing without grieving. And I think it is to let go, is to be willing to accept being an orphan. Because the moment that we begin to make a change, we lose the cues that tell us that we were in the old home. As much as we abhorred it, we clung to it. But to let go of it, and an example that I've sometimes used is people will stand on one side of a street in a long line waiting for a bread truck that seems never to come when they're offering a free smorgasbord across the street. But if I leave the line, I'll lose my place. What if the bread truck comes then? And people get stuck with holding on to hope that they are yet going to get what it was they deserved to have, that they wanted desperately, but didn't get, and will never get. So part of the process is understand, that's why the term focus dynamic therapy, the idea of focusing in on what is it that is being held on to, what is it that you were looking for and couldn't find, and to be able to grieve the loss of that. So it's understanding what it is that the child part of us is doing and allowing the adult to take over.
Wow, that's so true. And I think, the clients that I work with that come to me, they've spent a lot of time and energy to not feel their feelings, to not grieve, to not deal with it. So why is that, we sort of put all these walls and protections up to avoid it? Is because, like you said, we don't want to lose our place in line?
Yes, and where are we then? We're adrift. We're lost. The image of 2001 or Sandra Bullock's, I can't remember the name of her movie, where floating off into space.
Yeah.
The idea of that image is or when the guy is expelled from the spaceship in 2001 and floats in space and is desperately calling to HAL, the computer, and Hal's voice says goodbye. It's that kind of awesome sense of being all alone. Now, it has nothing to do with rationality or reality, but it has a lot to do with the emotionality. So letting go is to risk having lost everything before you can have anything.
Wow.
And nobody can guarantee you the anything,
No.
except that there'll be nothing without letting go.
Wow.
And
So
that
it takes a lot of courage to go through this process.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so when I was reading your book, I came across these concepts around the parts of our brain sort of that are developed, and I think you said maybe birth to 7 or maybe it was 11, but there's these concepts that sort of get stilted, right? And they get stuck sort of at that emotional child level. And I think there's a few of them that really, really impact women who are really struggling in relationship. And I was wondering if you could explain that, because I probably didn't explain it very well. And the first one I thought that is really interesting is an understanding of independence versus dependence, and sort of what happens when we don't get those needs met and how we define those things.
Yeah, I think when we just, well, it sort of segues nicely with what we were just discussing, and that is that we are in a state of infantile dependence at birth. And again, unlike some of the other vertebrates, if you see on Nature show, they give birth and they're sort of wobbly, but they get up on their feet and they join the herd and move along. So they're born with a tremendous capacity. Our closest relatives, the chimp, is born far more developed in mental capacity at birth than is the human. So the human, in a sense, has an additional roughly 9 months, so that really gestation is at least 18 months. And the reason, of course, we're born prematurely at 9 months, I mean, that we are absolutely born prematurely, and that the idea of needing to make that connection becomes vital, as we talked about before. So if that was a painful or abhorrent or adverse relationship, that's what describes our immature dependent state. It's a childhood state. So people will flee from that to what I then refer to as independence. That's a defense against getting into a relationship even as an adult, because the implication emotionally would be, if I'm back in a relationship, it would be in a state of immature dependence. I'd be the child back at the mercies of those adults in whatever way they failed me. So I will hold on to an independent position. And there are many people who look absolutely solid in their work world, or they even in terms of dating, as long as they don't get too close too long. And so they can be very successful looking. They can have a lot of friends, etc., but never any intimacy, because to do so means that there has to be a willingness to risk feeling vulnerable and going back to a state of interaction with another person. But this time I refer to it not as immature dependence. That's what is the state of the infant with the parent. But rather I refer to it as a state of autonomy, to be able to stand on one's own 2 feet and be close. Many people can stand on their own 2 feet as long as they maintain a distance from any intimate other. And that can occur obviously in marriages as well, that they're really independent individuals in their interaction rather than autonomous individuals, because they fear going back into the closeness that was painful, even as adults, with their partner who isn't anything like their parent. At one level, at least, they don't think is, but the reality is they are not the parent, and yet they respond as if it were the parent, and therefore has to be avoided.
Wow.
So they look very successful because they're very solid, solidly on 2 feet, but it's the distance between them and another person, socially or intimately, that's crucial.
So they literally have this like defense system sort of set up. Like, I don't want to be vulnerable, which is required for intimacy, because they're associating it with that dependent, that infantile dependency that they don't want to go back to.
The earliest definition of being in a relationship, which meant helpless and at the mercy of whoever the caretaker was. And if that was painful, difficult, unsatisfying, and to the nth degree, they're going to avoid it as much as possible. And so, indeed, unfortunately, we see people who live their whole lives never, ever risking being more than independent in relationships with other people.
Wow. It's so profound because all of this is happening. You think you're making choices, right? But really what I hear you saying is there's this unconscious patterning that was created that's kind of deciding for you unless you actually do the work to unravel it and heal it, grieve for it.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I chuckle at times when I hear references to some other cultures, although as there's the McDonaldization of the world, we're hearing less of it. But some of the cultures, India and others, I suppose, where marriages are arranged. And everybody is aghast at how could you have that possibly happen? Why would you let your parents arrange your marriage? Well, who else is doing it anyway, other than the internalized parent that we are then either being drawn to or repelled from, and that is what's going on within ourselves. And
wow.
So it's kind of I kind of smile when I hear references to arranged marriages. Yes, sure, we all have, without a conscious awareness, without being mindful of what's drawing us to the other person. We're having an arranged marriage. It's just arranged by the parents we've internalized rather than the parents who are external, in fact.
Wow.
And a corollary of that, that I often advise patients if they're in the dating game, and that is that, especially if they're coming out of a marriage or whatever in the dating, as they understand what the nature of the attraction, it's profound, the attraction that we feel. There was an old song, I can't now think of who, but some enchanted evening across a crowded way, you will see a stranger, and suddenly you will know. And there is an enormous nonverbal vocabulary, a cueing, totally nonverbal, to another person. What attracts us to that other person? And that when we begin, or at least in the people with whom I've had the privilege of working, when we look at that attraction, then it is the attraction to the familiar. And I'm always intrigued by the notion. It's fairly straightforward. I'm sort of delighted by it, but nonetheless, like a kid playing with a little toy, that familiar and familial are the same words. So we're drawn to the familial, and that's powerful because of this idea of finding ourselves back home, and especially, gosh, now I have a chance on this new battlefield to wage another battle that I can win. And of course, it's fated to always lose. So when I caution people who are going into the dating world, if you find yourself very attracted to the other person, then that has something to do with the mutual familiarity that you both have about an awareness of home that you came from. And that's okay, even as miserable as whatever your own home may have been, and whatever that partner's home may have been similar, if they are willing to converse about it, if they can talk about it, if they can recognize it, then you've got a solid, good relationship. But if they don't, either talk about it, acknowledge, recognize it, so that the idea of love at first sight really is familiarity at first sight, and it's powerful.
Wow. Yeah. So I think that's so interesting because I work with clients and they kind of go through the process and they start dating and they'll say like, he's good on paper, but like, I don't feel like any chemistry or I'm not feeling connected. So what I hear you saying is like, that actually could be a good sign. Right?
Exactly.
So
When
then,
I sell,
so what do you
yeah, go ahead.
do? Well, what do you so what do you do so that you can still create? Because everyone wants to create connection and they want to create chemistry and they want to feel some sort of passion. So what? So if it is a good sign, then what can you do to allow yourself to receive that unfamiliarity and to turn it into something that can work for you?
Well, an extension of what I was saying before, that if a person you find yourself very powerfully drawn to, be careful, be aware that that's a draw to something familiar, and that may be not necessarily beneficial unless that person is aware of it, is willing to talk about it. But as the example you're describing, the corollary of that is, what if, and then I then go on to point out to patients that if that person does not repel you, or you're not repulsed by them, but it's give it a chance, because it's a new relationship, a new experience. It's something different. So ideally, if we're drawn powerfully to someone and they converse about it, understand what the child part of themselves is and is influencing them as adults, and talk about it without acting it out, they talk it out, that's great. But if the person is on paper wonderful, et cetera, but don't feel much, are you repelled? Are you repulsed? No, of course not. They seem like a nice person. Well, why not go out again and take a chance and begin to know that person as an adult? Because the knowing that we have that is the powerful attraction is knowing that person as a child and not as an adult. And give that one who is not repelling or not particularly attractive, give that person a chance to be known as an adult. And that's the key that I think is important.
Yeah.
We're
Oh my
drawn to
gosh.
it.
That's amazing. I'm sitting here going to myself, oh my God, this is so brilliant, because you just said something I've never heard put this way before, which is why you're so good at what you do, that you get to know this person as an adult. So meaning your adult self is engaging in trying to connect and get to know them, and also to their adult self. I mean, what is that? Are you doing that, or are you automatically looking to some child version of them, or how do you see another
No, I
person
think,
adult to adult?
yeah, I think again, one of the keys is to be aware of the two-edged sword about attraction. That's what we just were describing. That
Yep.
while it's very lovely and very thrilling and exciting, the other edge of that is that it may be an invitation back into a repetition of conflict. In taking histories of couples with whom I'm working, it's astonishing the number of times that frying pan to fire occurs with people who've had multiple marriages, that they simply go back to the same pattern or the exact opposite, which is a cute trick we play on ourselves, but we can get into that. But the idea that if the person is not that instant attraction, but seems like a very nice person, allowing ourselves to get to know them is, again, going to be part of an adult-to-adult interaction, because it's free of that immediate kind of intensity. That doesn't mean there couldn't then be the development of an intense or loving experience at an adult level, so that their childhood and your own childhood are different. They don't totally match. That's why we're not powerfully drawn, but pretty decent and nice person. And let's see what can happen. And the old expression, familiarity breeds contempt, is the expression, but I like to modify it that familiarity breeds content.
Mm.
And giving that person a chance is what becomes important in a relationship. So the person who says, well, not very exciting, a nice person, but not very exciting. Great. Are you going to see him again? Because they may become excited as you get to tune into who they are in real time, rather than being tuned in to an old broadcast that had nothing but static.
Wow, I bet there's all these women listening right now that are like putting their hands on their forehead going, I should have given that guy another chance. So, okay, so this other pattern that I see in a lot of the people who listen to this show is that they are super black and white thinkers. You know, like he's in, he's out. I'm good, I'm bad. You know, dating is awful, dating is amazing. You know, it like they have to I feel like part of it is like it makes them feel in control. And I know you have a whole body of work on this binary versus analog thinking and how it can sort of cause us emotional distress in our relationships. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's so important, and it is so relevant to what's happening in the world today. Let me try to expand on that rather than just tease you with it. And that is that we are born, our minds work in a binary way, meaning yes, no, on, off, good, bad, up, down. That's how our minds work until approximately 7 to 11 years of age, when we begin to develop the capacity for analog thinking. Now, what's the difference between digital and analog? Well, a light switch is a good example. If the light switch is simply on and off, that's digital. But if it's a dimmer switch, it includes on and off at the extremes, but it has an infinite range of possibilities between those extremes. And so analog thinking has this range of possibilities and not just on or off. On or off are part of it, but it's not the totality. So whenever I hear people talking about, and unfortunately our political situation is rife with binary thinking, yes, no, good, bad, all, none. You're either with me or against me. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
I'm good, he's bad, vote for me. That kind of thing. Our electoral system caters to the most fundamental aspect of thinking. Reduce everything to a simple soundbite that is good and everything else is bad. So whenever I hear people talk about a binary situation, and I can't immediately think of an example, but other than political, I'm trying to steer clear of that, but it's so rampant today. But the idea of the absolute, it's either or, and that's the way our minds work. So when I hear almost nothing is absolute binary, almost nothing. Even I joke with people who say, yeah, what about death? Well, even there, it's sometimes hard to diagnose death. That physicians can have difficulty in making the diagnosis of death. You'd think that was pretty clear.
Yeah.
What's alive? And there's even a philosophical debate about what's alive. We can clearly do, but is a rock alive? And there becomes a whole, not to divert into that, but the whole idea that there's a range even with those things we think are absolutes that have a gray. And in that sense, the simplest is back to that binary mode. It caters to our earliest capacity, which is not fully on board in thinking, but just reacting. So whenever I hear people talk in absolute terms, good, bad, yes, no, that to me is a timestamp going back to a conflict before 7 to 11 years of age. And so when we talk, it comes up not infrequently when people say, my mother was so destructive to my father that I swore I'd never be like her, says the little girl. Mm-hmm. And so she will grow up. But how can she be sure she's not like her mother? Well, by marrying a guy who's abusive. Now, that assures her she's paid dearly for a premium for an assurance policy that she is not her mother. The price she pays is being abused. just like she was with her mother, but she's not her mother. And so I think the idea of whenever there is this absolute oppositeness, or I hear when people give their backgrounds, the absolute images, then I know that we're talking about conflict at an early stage. And it is a trick also that, and it touches a bit on something you asked earlier, and that is if I know that I don't want to be my mother, let's say if I use that example, or my father, whatever the example might be, then I'm going to make sure I'm not like that by being exactly the opposite. Now, the exact opposite is very much like looking in a mirror. What do you see? You see the identical opposite image. And so people operate that way where the pendulum swings, and we can see that in generations. I've had some patients who knew of their family backgrounds for 4 or 5 generations, and when asked to characterize those relationships that they're aware of or the family lore exists for, it's like a pendulum swinging from one extreme to the other. In this generation, the women had the nature of that conflict with their husbands. In the next generation, the husbands had it with the conflict with their wives, and it's just you know, the conflict remains the same. It just varies in terms of who's carrying the ball. And I think that that's what I'm referring to about a digital defense against being like what we didn't like by going to the exact opposite. So the child part of us says, that's who you've got to be, like it or lump it. And then we do this little trick that we pull on the adult by becoming the opposite. So it's, again, one example comes to mind of the woman who complained about Charlie can't keep a nickel in his pocket. Anytime he gets any money, it burns through, et cetera, et cetera. And you look at the background and ask about his father and get some family history. And he describes his father as being so tight that he could make Lincoln on a penny scream in pain. And what does he do to be different? Because the father was always terrified they'll end up in the poorhouse. We can't spend any money. Can't do anything. No. You can't expend it. No, you make do, patch it. Don't buy anything new. And he then is out wasting funds and being exactly the opposite. But guess what? Headed for the poorhouse because he's going to exhaust all of his financial resources. So the very message of the father, you'll end up in the poorhouse, so pinch every penny. He then says, I don't want to be that skinflint. I'll be profligate with money and end up declaring bankruptcy. So it's that ending up exactly where we wanted not to be. And I think that, by the way, is a corollary to when you want to know what the nature of a conflict is, look at where the behavior, not what the person is saying. Person may say, I want to date a nice guy, I want to have a nice relationship, but I keep seeming to marry or be with these alcoholic bums. I don't understand it. Well, what is there about that draws you to them? And what is it that you're protecting about yourself in the attraction to someone you don't want? And there, again, comes the absolute binary, the fear that something that if they don't have that external assurance, that they will otherwise have to confront something painful within themselves.
Wow. So is it possible when you go through this healing process that you can become analog? Are you able to make those choices?
Absolutely. And I think one of the advantages of what we're talking about is that it becomes a cue. What previously was a problem now can become part of the solution. That is, that if a person can be made aware of their binary capacity, their thinking, and recognize, wait a minute, I'm not allowing for any alternative opportunities or possibilities. If they can become aware of that, wait a minute, if I'm thinking in this digital mode rather than analog, well, that means I'm ignoring options that do exist between these extremes that I'm otherwise saying exist only. And to have that awareness is extremely important.
Wow. You are so smart. I just love you. Really, you just have this gift for just making everything so clear cut and so like easy to understand and obviously not so simple to achieve without some support and some help. And so I love that. Well, I definitely want to have you back in the dating den if you'll come, because I know there's a million more things that we could talk about. Ladies, if you, yes, great. Oh, good. If ladies, you definitely want to check out the show notes, because you can get a hold of Dr. Kardener's book and learn more about focused dynamic therapy. I am so honored to have had this conversation with you. I cannot wait to speak to you more and have you back. And before we go, is there sort of like any last piece of advice or thoughts that you would sort of send out to women who are struggling with some of these issues that we've talked about today?
There's always tomorrow if we risk changing today and make it not the yesterday. So
Wow.
as long as we keep yesterday the same as today, tomorrow's going to suck. And it's taking that chance on letting go of yesterday, experiencing today, that allows us to have a different tomorrow.
Thank you so much for being here. Ladies, date with dignity. Keep it going. And I look forward to seeing you all back in the dating den. Thanks, Dr. Kardener.
Thank you.